It's Hard to Believe, the podcast that brings you absolutely true but very hard to believe stories. I'm your host, G Wiz. Now let's get into it.
Battleship X and Seaman Calvin Graham. When the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, Hawaii in 1941, it had a dramatic impact on the way most Americans viewed the still unfurling war in Europe. The American public was unprepared for such an attack because at the time, America was neutral as far as the war was concerned and was actively negotiating a treaty with the Japanese. Prior to the onslaught, the vast majority of Americans did not support getting involved in what was known as the European War. On December 7, 1941, the date that will live in infamy, everything changed. It's hard to believe, but Japanese bombers killed 2,403 unsuspecting souls and wounded another 1,178 civilians and military personnel in just 90 minutes. The loss of battleships, submarines, and warplanes was staggering. An 11-year-old paperboy in Crockett, Texas, read the news as he sold out of papers. Despite his young age, Calvin Graham, like most young boys at the time, wanted to do something to aid the war effort. He dreamed of being a hero in battle at the front lines. The military would gladly accept anyone aged 17 or older with their parents' permission. They would even make exceptions for some 16-year-olds. But Calvin was hoping he could hoodwink his way in at just 11 years old. Although he didn't look a day older than his 11 years, Calvin was already living on his own and supported himself by selling newspapers and delivering telegrams. He had left home to escape an abusive stepdad, a house full of kids, and poverty. Someone told him that shaving makes a beard grow in darker, so the young boy began to shave his already baby-smooth face. Point in fact, shaving does not affect hair growth in any way. Calvin Graham also had some older friends who were going to try to enlist despite also being underage. We will never know the true number of young boys who faked their age to enlist during World War II. But we do know that they number into the thousands. The military often turned a blind eye and allowed these kids in because they badly needed new recruits to replace the dead and injured. It took a while to prepare, but in August of 1942, Calvin and his friends took their forged documents and proceeded to enlist in the Navy. During the medical exam, a sharp-eyed dentist took one look at the 12-year-old's teeth and immediately proclaimed, "You're only 12." Calvin used his deepest voice to hold fast to his lie of being 17. "I'm 17, I swear. I'm 17, I swear." Eventually, the dentist gave in and allowed the tenacious boy to ship off to boot camp. It's hard to believe, but by October of 1942, 12-year-old Calvin Graham and friends were stationed on board the USS South Dakota, one of the most expensive and heavily armed naval ships of her day. She could carry 2,500 men and was armed with 81 guns and cannons. Manning those guns were the very same young recruits fresh from basic training. Their job was to provide heavy anti-aircraft fire, a job they did a little too well. It's said that the South Dakota's gunners were quick to fire at anything in the air, and that included Allied fighters. American pilots even warned each other to stay well out of the South Dakota's firing range. The South Dakota was sent to join a task force led by the famous USS Enterprise. No, not the spaceship, but rather the legendary aircraft carrier that the future spacecraft would be named after. At just 12 years old, Calvin Graham, whose naval job was to load 40mm rounds into an anti-aircraft gun, would engage the enemy at Santa Cruz Islands near Guadalcanal. During the Battle of Santa Cruz, the USS South Dakota shot down 26 enemy planes, but the ship did not go unscathed. During the fighting, a 500-pound bomb struck the South Dakota's main gun turret. The ship's captain, Thomas Gatch, who was nearby on the deck and saw the bomb coming, refused to take cover, saying, "I consider it beneath the dignity of a captain of an American battleship to flop for a Japanese bomb." The resulting explosion hurled the captain into a wall and knocked him unconscious. I guess that's more dignified than ducking for cover. The captain and ship survived the battle. After undergoing repairs in Pearl Harbor, they joined the Second Naval Battle of Guadalcanal. Things did not go well for America and her allies. For one thing, the chief engineer of the South Dakota had violated safety procedures and locked down a circuit breaker during the recent repairs. This created a cascading electrical failure which caused the ship's radar to go offline, her radio to go dead, and most of her guns to become inoperable. The helpless ship soon found itself surrounded by the enemy. Meanwhile, on board, Calvin Graham, who had just turned 13 years old, was manning his gun when an explosion sent shrapnel tearing through his jaw and knocked the young man down 3 stories of the ship's infrastructure. After regaining consciousness, the battered, toothless, burned, and bleeding boy helped pull the other injured seamen to safety. 40 fellow crewmen had already been killed and another 180 lay wounded as the ship was surrounded on all sides by Japanese gunboats. Fortunately, another battleship, the Washington, slipped in unnoticed and began destroying the enemy vessels. Under the cover of darkness, fog, and smoke, the South Dakota slipped away from the battle that had sunk 3 other U.S. destroyers. The Japanese assumed that the South Dakota had also sunk. The U.S. took advantage of this mistake and removed all markings from the vessel. From now on, she would be known as Battleship X. For his heroism during the battle, 13-year-old Calvin Graham was awarded the Bronze Star Medal, and for his injuries he received the Purple Heart. Plus, he received another Navy unit commendation. Calvin was even featured in a newsreel, which his mother saw. Until then, she had no idea where her son was. She immediately wrote to the Navy informing him that he was only 13 years old. He was promptly arrested, discharged, and put in jail in Corpus Christi, Texas. 3 months later, fearing negative publicity, officials released him from jail but stripped him of all of his awards, medals, and military benefits. Dubbed the baby vet by the press, Calvin Graham returned to his hometown of Houston as a hero. Calvin tried to return to school, but the 13-year-old was too far behind to catch up. At age 14, he got married and found work as a welder. At age 15, he became a father. At age 17, he got divorced, and still being a patriot, he enlisted in the Marines, this time legally. At age 20, he was serving in the Korean War when he fell from a pier and broke his back. Because he received a medical discharge instead of an honorable discharge, Calvin was not able to get the medical and dental benefits he needed to fix the wounds he received while serving. The only work he could find was selling magazines. He would spend the rest of his life fighting to get an honorable discharge and the benefits he so clearly deserved. It's hard to believe, but in 1994, 2 years after his death, the military finally relented and returned the seaman's Purple Heart to his family. Calvin Graham is the youngest person to serve in the U.S. military and fight during World War II. His story is a testament to the good hearts and strong will of the untold thousands of children under age 16 that fought and died in America's armed forces.
You can find links and more information about this topic and our complete library at our website, hardtobelieve.blog. Thank you for listening. This has been Hard to Believe. I'm your host, G Wiz, asking you to please like and subscribe for exclusive content.